Chapter 44 Crusaders. Several days later. It was Saturday. Outside the windows of Eventide and BB's home, late morning sunlight could be seen spilling across the trees and landscape, giving the early autumn air a serene and pleasant appearance. It was mildly chilly outside, but inside the home it was nice and warm. Something like that would, under normal circumstances, help one to relax and ease their tensions. This was hardly any normal day, though. Applebloom would be showing up any minute, and the thought of seeing the farm girl again after so long had BB pacing back and forth in the living room with an almost manic look on his face. He was still in his true form, his wings sporadically twitching on his back, and his hooves moving stiffly with every step he took. As he spun around to repeat his route, his eyes were revealed to be glued to the floor, and his teeth were just slightly visible as his lips had peeled back in an apprehensive grimace. Eventide and Fluttershy were standing off to one side, watching him pace with expressions that displayed a mixture of amusement and concern. Buddha, who was comfortably resting on the couch, just looked confused. After another round of paces, BB came to a stop in the middle of the room and stared expectantly at the door. A second ticked by as he waited with bated breath for the dreaded knocking sound. 5 seconds. 10. 30. Just like the last dozen or so times he had stopped to look, the door did not show any signs of admitting visitors. Disappointed, BB let off an impatient huff and went back to pacing, his hooves echoing even louder in the otherwise quiet room. After another minute or so of this, Eventide must have decided that enough was enough. He stepped forward and placed his foot in BB's path, preventing the little guy from going any further. He blinked at the obstacle, then pouted up at Eventide in confusion.
"Dad, what gives?"
He whined in a pathetic voice while pawing at his father's shin. Eventide rolled his eyes from BB's tone and got down onto one knee in front of him. "BB, you need to calm down," he stated matter-of-factly before placing his hand on top of BB's head as if to ruffle his currently non-existent hair. "Nobody's gonna want to come see you if you're all jumpy. Take a deep breath and relax."
But I can't relax, Dad,"
BB protested, pulling his head out from beneath Eventide's hand and frowning at him.
"I'm nervous. I've only seen her one time before and she was helping me get home after I hurt myself. I've never just hung out with someone that isn't you or Fluttershy before."
Eventide nodded along in understanding while lifting his hands in a placating gesture. "I know. I understand. But that is exactly why we're both here," he responded while gesturing at both Fluttershy and himself. "You're nervous. And yeah, you have every right to be. But try to remember that we're here to help things go smoothly and keep you all out of trouble." BB looked at Eventide for a moment, then over at Fluttershy. She smiled and nodded in agreement with Eventide's assessment. Their auras were both alight with care and confidence, although perhaps a little less with Fluttershy. They believed things would go well regardless, and what reason did BB have to doubt them? Following Eventide's advice, BB sucked in a long, deep breath and then let it out in a heavy sigh. He let his shoulders loosen up and gave a nod of his head before looking into Eventide's eyes again.
"Okay, I'll try."
A knock came to the door. BB jumped out of his skin. He wasn't sure if he could count that as being literal or not, because as he jumped, he was consumed in a swirl of green fire and turned into his human shape. As the flames parted, he wobbled a bit on his feet before turning to look at the door with a distinctly more uneasy look on his face. Eventide sighed and shook his head. So much for relaxing," he breathed before standing up and heading for the door. "I'm coming," he called out as he approached. BB capitalized on the moment to take one more deep breath and try to calm his nerves. He watched as Eventide opened up the door and, sure enough, there was Applebloom on the other side. She was wearing a long-sleeved shirt and blue jeans that day, her shirt being a few shades lighter than her pants. She smiled happily as the door opened and tipped her head at Eventide in greeting.
Howdy, Mr. Eventide. I'm not late, am I?
Hello, Apple Bloom. You're right on time, actually, Eventide greeted, before looking behind Apple Bloom. Whatever he was looking at, BB couldn't see it from here, but it made Eventide's aura shimmer with shades of purple. And I see you came with extra guests, he said in a noticeably more guarded tone. Apple Bloom shrank back a little, a sheepish smile appearing on her face. She reached a hand up to scratch at the back of her head while looking back at what Eventide was seeing.
I was kind of hanging out with a few of my friends when the bus pulled in. They wanted to come along. Sorry I didn't call to let you know, but I didn't have any service on the bus, and I wouldn't take no for an answer. I'm real sorry, but they're my best friends, and I trust them to be nice. Is this all right?
She finished, turning back to Eventide and clasping her hands behind her back. Her eyes shifted briefly past the older man and caught BB's gaze. The two made eye contact for a moment, and BB couldn't stop himself from giving her an albeit shaky wave. Eventide, with a raised eyebrow, glanced back at BB, then at Fluttershy. After a moment, he gave off a quiet sigh and stepped aside to allow Apple Bloom to enter. As long as they behave themselves too, then no, it's no problem, he relented, his gaze lingering meaningfully on Fluttershy as if to ask for help. BB turned his attention away from his parent as not one, not two, but 3 girls, all looking to be in their early to mid-teens, walked in. Apple Bloom was up first, obviously, and her eyes swept across the front room of the house as she entered. It took BB a second to remember that she had never actually been in here before. She let out a low, impressed whistle as she took in the sights.
Wow, nice place, B. I'll say.
The second teenager agreed as she walked up to Apple Bloom's side. She had orange skin and a head of short, messy purple hair that matched the color of her eyes. She was wearing a black hoodie with the sleeves rolled up to her elbows and a pair of baggy green shorts. She looked around and nodded in approval.
Spacious, warm, I like it.
The third girl had a more demure look on her face as she entered and took a position on Apple Bloom's other side. She had skin the color of pristine marshmallows, and curly pastel purple hair hung down to the small of her back. Her eyes were a rich green color, reminding BB of the forest outside, and her attire consisted of a white and pink striped tank top underneath an unbuttoned hot pink t-shirt that matched nicely with the long, flowing yellow skirt that obscured her legs.
These must be Scootaloo and Sweetie Belle,
BB mused as he thought back on his phone calls with Apple Bloom. His eyes moved from one teenager to the next, taking in all of the details and committing them to memory.
The Crusaders.
After a few seconds of admiring the inside of the home, Apple Bloom's eyes settled on BB, and her face lit up along with her aura. She took a few steps forward, a big grin appearing on her face.
Hiya, baby. Been a while,
she greeted enthusiastically before holding out her hand. BB stared at it for a few seconds before his brain kicked back into gear.
You're supposed to grab and shake, you idiot,
he screamed at himself mentally. He smiled back at her and reached out to take Apple Bloom's hand in his.
Yeah, it's good to see it. Yeah.
He was suddenly cut off when he felt just how tight her grip was, and lost a little of his balance from the intensity of the shake. His arm was thrown up and down with little to no mercy whatsoever.
Whoa!
Apple Bloom quickly released his hand after a few more shakes and slid back a few inches, clasping her hands behind her back and bending forward slightly.
So, how you been? You're like doing better?
BB steadied himself on his feet before offering her any reply.
Holy cow, does she have strong hands?
He thought as he blew on his now sore fingers. After a moment, he gave her a smile of his own and nodded his head.
Uh-huh, it's all better now, look.
As if to prove his point, he jumped up and down a few times, showing that he could, in fact, stand on his own 2 legs just fine. Apple Bloom's aura lit up even more brightly, and she gave a sigh of relief.
Oh, that's good. I was kind of worried that I messed something up. I'm only partway through my first aid class, which you're taking thanks to me,
the marshmallow girl said in a teasing, sing-song voice, before taking a step forward and giving BB a friendly smile and cursory examination.
So, you're BB,
she said while holding out her own hand.
It's nice to finally meet you. My name's Sweetie Belle. Applebloom keeps telling us about you.
BB took her hand in his and was relieved to find that her grip was much more gentle than Applebloom's. Her skin was also soft and far smoother than the farm girl's, making his mind blank a little as her fingers slid across his. He quickly snapped out of it and smiled.
It's nice to meet you too, Sweetie Belle. I really like your hair. Aw, thank you.
Sweetie beamed at the praise, lifting a hand up to idly toy with one of the curls hanging from her head.
My big sister Rarity helped me figure out how to style it, and it's a lot of work to keep it looking nice. Hey, don't forget about me.
The third girl piped up while stepping forward as well.
I'm Scootaloo,
she declared before clapping BB on the shoulder.
Nice to meet ya.
BB winced from the smack and idly reached a hand up to rub at his now complaining shoulder.
Nice to meet you too,
he replied in a slightly awkward voice.
So, did y'all have any ideas on what we're doing?
Applebloom asked after a moment, glancing back and forth between her two friends.
I'm open to just about anything, as long as your dad's okay with it.
Eventide, who had remained by the door the entire time, waved his hand dismissively. Don't mind me. We'll cut in if something's not okay, but otherwise just have fun, he assured before giving BB a small wink and a smile.
Okay, so what's the plan?
Scootaloo asked curiously, crossing her arms over her chest. BB suddenly went stiff, and his hands began to play with each other over his heart. A heavy, awkward silence began to fill the air, and BB idly scuffed his foot on the floor. His hands drew back behind his back, and his eyes darted from one teenager to the next as if looking for inspiration. He'd been expecting just one friend, not three. As much as he hated to admit it, he was feeling overwhelmed and had no idea what to do or say. Talking with Applebloom when he had been hurt had been one thing, and so was talking to her over the phone. He could manage things like that. But this? He had no idea what to do now. And so he looked helplessly over his shoulder at Fluttershy. She looked back at him, and a smile of understanding appeared on her face. She gave him a reassuring look, stepped forward, and cleared her throat.
Applebloom, Sweetie Belle said that you talked about BB. Do you mind telling us what you've been saying about him?
She asked, drawing the attention of the visitors. The heads of the three teenage girls swerved to the side to look up at Fluttershy in surprise, their eyes going wide and their auras glowing with confusion.
What the? Fluttershy?
Scootaloo asked with a raised eyebrow.
What are you doing here?
BB frowned and looked back and forth between them. Did they know each other?
I'm good friends with Eventide,
Fluttershy responded happily, while gesturing at the man in question.
And I help him take care of BB whenever I can. Oh, okay, I gotcha.
Scootaloo, satisfied with the answer, nodded her head before taking a step back and pointing her thumb at Applebloom.
Well, maybe told us all about how she found him hurt out in the woods, and how she used all the lessons she's learned in her first aid class to help him get better.
Sweetie Belle nodded and picked up the story from there.
Mm-hmm. And she also talked about how interesting she thinks BB is.
That got BB's full attention.
Interesting?
He echoed, finally returning his gaze to Applebloom and tilting his head.
What do they mean by that?
Applebloom got a slightly sheepish look for just a moment, but sobered up quickly. She cleared her throat and gave BB a smile.
Well, I just thought y'all were interesting. I mean, I'd never seen you around before, and then suddenly there you are, out alone in the middle of the forest with a leg injury. Kind of an interesting way to meet somebody, I think. Oh,
BB said slowly. It made sense, he supposed. Sweetie Belle leaned forward a little bit, planting her hands on her knees and tilting her head at BB with a curious look.
So, why don't you tell us a little about yourself? I kind of want to know more about Apple Bloom's first patient.
BB perked up a little bit, a small smile growing on his face.
Well...
That smile became strained as his brain, for reasons he would never truly be able to understand, decided to go back into its previously awkward state. The silence threatened to return, but luckily, this time, he was able to find his voice.
I like books?
He finally managed to stammer out with an awkward and crooked grin. Unbeknownst to BB, Eventide's face found his palm. Thankfully, Sweetie Belle didn't seem too put off by the incredible awkwardness of that statement. In fact, if anything, she seemed endeared to it.
Really? What kind of books are you into? I like romance stories and mysteries myself. I bet a lot of that comes from your big sister, don't it?
Apple Bloom noted with a small smirk while crossing her arms over her chest and nudging Sweetie in the ribs with her elbow. She glanced sideways at Apple Bloom with a pout.
So? You like apples because of your big sister?
Apple Bloom made to retort, paused, and then shrugged.
Touche.
Sweetie rolled her eyes at that and looked back to BB again.
So, what about you?
BB gave it some thought, a hand coming up to rub at his chin.
Well, I kind of like a lot of stories. I don't get to leave the house very often, so books and TV are how I spend most of my day when Dad's not schooling me. But if I had to pick a favorite...
He hummed quietly to himself before a very specific book sprang back into his mind. He perked up and grinned.
Oh, I know. I think I even still have a copy of it downstairs. Downstairs?
Scootaloo questioned, her eyes soon finding the staircase that descended into the basement. Her face scrunched up slightly in confusion.
You keep your books in the basement?
His bedroom's in the basement. Eventide was quick to clarify, taking a step forward. All eyes turned to him and he continued. You see, we used to live in a really small house with only one bedroom, and that's where I slept. When BB kind of came into things, though, I needed a place for him to sleep. So I converted the basement into a bedroom for him. He liked it a lot when he was smaller, to the point that Fluttershy and I kind of took to calling him the basement boy. The name stuck, and it's been something of a tradition that BB's bedroom is supposed to be in the basement. BB blinked a few times as he tried to process all of that information and commit it to memory. A cover story wasn't very good if nobody else knew it, after all. Scootaloo visibly pondered Eventide's answer for a minute before shrugging her shoulders noncommittally.
That's weird, but I like it. Okay, lead the way, Beebs.
BB had started to make his way for the stairs when he heard that. He paused and slowly looked over his shoulder at Scootaloo, his expression filled with complete bewilderment.
Beebs?
He parroted incredulously. Apple Bloom shot Scootaloo a deadpan look before her palm rose up to cover her face.
Scootaloo. No.
She scolded slowly. Scootaloo pouted and crossed her arms over her chest with her cheeks puffing up.
Oh, you guys are no fun.
A short time later, the group stepped into BB's bedroom. As soon as the lights flicked on, Apple Bloom panned her eyes around to scan the room and get a feel for it. Compared to the other room in the basement they had just passed through, BB's bedroom was surprisingly nice. It wasn't all that dusty or anything, and the walls had been painted a very pretty shade of sky blue. The bed in the corner looked perhaps a little small for BB as he was now, but Apple Bloom didn't pay that much mind. What was more of note was the remarkably large collection of toys and other assorted childish things. Some of them looked more appropriate for toddlers, though judging by how some of them were stuffed into the corners, she could only assume that they weren't getting much use. BB didn't give her much time to ponder the space, though, as he quickly made his way directly for the tall bookcase that sat against the left wall, a little deeper in the room. Apple Bloom stood beside him and looked up and down at the shelves as well, curious about BB's collection. It was impressive by her standards, though, to be fair, she reminded herself her standards were pretty low. Bibi's collection was quite varied, too. The books on each shelf had no form of discernible organization and ranged from short little kids' picture books to a few middle school adventure novels, and there was even a young adult novel trilogy held snugly on the top shelf. It gave off the feeling of organized chaos, where Bibi himself knew where everything was and that it was right where he wanted it. Applebloom gave a small, pleased hum at the sight. She then looked down at Bibi, who was crouched down to pull one very specific book from the bottom shelf. To the surprise of not just Applebloom, but also her two friends, the book was something one might expect a preschooler to enjoy. The thin picture book had a blue hardcover, and on the front was a drawing of a big, cartoony green dragon. It was looking down on an equally cartoony boy and girl, and the text, "Pete the Big Green Dragon," was written over the top of them in bold, friendly letters. Scootaloo barely stifled a snort, though Applebloom didn't miss it, and shot her a warning glance. Still, that didn't stop Scootaloo from frowning in confusion.
Pete the Big... Isn't that one like for really little kids?
She asked, sounding a little incredulous. Bibi visibly winced under Scootaloo's tone, and Sweetie was quick to speak up.
Hey, I'm sure he has a reason for liking it so much,
she said before coming up to Bibi's side and crouching down.
Right?
Bibi looked sideways at her and gave a grateful smile.
Yeah. See, I know I'm a little old for this book, but...
He slowly stood to his full height and turned around to show it to the others more clearly.
It's my favorite because of the message in it.
A nostalgic and fond smile gradually began to appear on his face, and he ran his hand over the front cover.
It helped me out. When I was really little, I felt like I didn't belong here. With my dad, I mean. I felt like I was holding him back. Like I wasn't supposed to be here. But this book helped me realize that I do belong here with him. And that's why I like it so much. Aww, that's so sweet,
Sweetie Belle said in an adoring coo, her hands folding together over her chest. Applebloom nodded along in agreement.
So what's your favorite because of sentimental value?
Bibi smiled and nodded. His eyes lingered on the cover for a second before he looked up at the three of them, and his smile grew even wider.
Yeah, it is. Do you want to sit down and read it with me?
While they were all a little taken back by the request, Sweetie was quick to recover.
I don't mind,
she said with a short nod.
I may not be a little kid anymore myself, but I like a good children's book from time to time.
Applebloom gave Sweetie a sideways glance and smile before turning back to Bibi.
So I'm here. Count me in.
All eyes then turned to Scootaloo, who looked more than a little conflicted at the prospect. Bibi got the impression that she was the sort to try and act cool and mature all the time.
Well, I kinda,
she rambled before letting off a sigh.
Okay, sure. Why not?
Bibi beamed and quickly ran over to sit down on one side of the bed while flipping open to the first page. Applebloom and Sweetie Belle followed shortly after and sat down next to him on the bed, while Scootaloo elected to stay standing. Once everything had settled down and everyone was in their place, Bibi cleared his throat and began to read. As he did, Applebloom had to admit to herself, the little guy had a good voice.